Okay, so I have noon, and so we're going to go ahead and start. I have noon Eastern time. Of course, if you're coming from other places, you have different times, but we want to welcome you to today's Lunch and Learn, which is welcome to evidence-based math instruction, or I should really say it's to the best of evidence-based math instruction. And thank you for all who are introducing yourselves, folks from Michigan and Georgia and El Paso and Danville and Las Vegas. And welcome, Rick. We appreciate everyone who is here today. I am Steve Schmidt. I'm an adult education consultant, and I'm really grateful to New Readers Press for sponsoring our session today on the best of evidence-based math. I am joined with my good friend, excuse me, Greg Stultz, who is an education sales consultant and national training coordinator for New Readers Press, and who looks really good in a bow tie. And I wish I had a bow tie that was as cool as Greg, but I'm not as cool as Greg, and I just need to get over that. So we will be doing today's session, and I'll be leading off, and Greg will be doing the fantastic finish. But we want to welcome you and thank you again, everyone who is introducing yourself in the chat. So the big question is, Steve, why do you love New Readers Press? Well, New Readers Press is the publishing arm of ProLiteracy, and all the money after expenses that ProLiteracy earns goes to fund New Readers Press, excuse me. Everything that New Readers Press earns from selling books and the other materials they do goes to fund ProLiteracy. And ProLiteracy is a nonprofit organization that works with literacy causes, not only in the United States, but around the world, and do some amazing things. We could spend the whole time today talking about it, but we do not have time. So that's one thing to consider as you're dealing with New Readers Press. But let's get to our main subject today, and that is the best of evidence-based math. And our objectives for today: you will be able to, at the end of the Lunch and Learn, explain some evidence-based best practices for math instruction and describe how to apply those. So that is what we are going to do today. And again, if you don't have the handout, please grab that, because we will be referring to that, and the pages you see are referencing that handout. So I'm going to tell you a story about myself. As I've been in adult ed for 29 years, and I've helped hundreds, if not thousands, of students to earn their high school equivalency. And I've spent a fair bit of time teaching mathematics. So what I would used to hear many times when I was a young instructor back in the 90s was a student would go off and take their GED test, and they would come back and say these dreaded words to me: what you taught me was not, and I'm going to pause for a minute. If you know the rest of this, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. What you taught me was not what? If you've taught some math, here we go. Nancy, thank you. And Belinda and Debbie, yeah, what you taught me was not on the test. And I would hear this all the time from students that we sent off to take the GED math test. And I got to wondering, well, Steve, what are you doing instructionally that's causing students to come back and say this? And I was looking at the way I was teaching, and we did, started out with fractions, and here's how you add a fraction, and here's how you subtract a fraction, and here's how you multiply a fraction, and all this stuff. And then we go through decimals, and then we go through percents, and then we try our best to do algebra and try our best to do some of the basics of geometry. And then students send students off to take the high school equivalency without really ever practicing the same type of problems that they would see on the actual test. And Christopher Miller, thank you. Nothing you taught me was on the test. I've heard that too. And that used to keep me up late at night. So what I want to do today is really examine some of our instructional processes that we're using and see if we can't come up with some conclusions about what might be more effective in terms of teaching. And so if you'll join me on the handout on page 2, and again, if you're having some issues, Greg Stultz in the chat can help you access that handout. But I always believe in being grounded in research, and there is some great research in adult education's mathematics instruction. And a lot of what we're going to use here in this particular session comes from a publication done by TEAL, the Teaching Excellence in Adult Literacy Organization. They put together a wonderful research work back in 2012, and it's called the TEAL MathWorks Guide. And it's a really great guide for how to teach math to adults in an evidence-based format. And so they highlighted inside that publication a couple of lessons. And so on page 2, let's take a look at this lesson and see what we can learn about what a research-based practice will look like inside mathematics instruction. And I'll pause every so often where we can discuss and think about that. So page 2. Inside the handout, and Nancy, Greg can help you to get that with that link there. So it says, the instructor has a student, Sam, who works at a small restaurant. Sam's told the class about the tasks he does on the job. So the instructor used that information to provide an activity for the class to explore and expand on patterns and to connect patterns with rules. So let's pause here just a second. So where did this problem come from? This problem came from real life. This problem came from one of the students in the class. They were describing a situation that went on at work and were asking for guidance on how to help with that. And the problem was basically Sam, who worked at a restaurant, and he had to make quarter-pound burgers, and the beef comes in 3.5-pound packages. And so he needed to figure out how much ground beef he needs to take out of the freezer to make 50 burgers. Interesting to note, they did a study some years ago where they asked students they asked adult students, do you do math on your job? And almost to a person, the students said, no, we never do math on our job. Well, they went to the workplace and they studied what they did, and they found they were doing math all the time, but they didn't think it was math because it didn't come from a book. Let's let that sink in. And of course, math doesn't necessarily come from a book. Math was created to explain the world around us. We have wonderful books and materials that can help us to show that connection, but math is real. Math comes from the world around us. It was not created by the authors of Number Power 2. And if you've been in adult ed math for a while, you know what publication I'm talking about. So this was a real life problem based on a student's work experience. So let's look at this lesson again. The instructor starts talking and they're saying, what exactly do we have to figure out in this problem? Do we need one answer or multiple answers? They keep going. Is this similar to problems we've worked on before? What approach did we use? Can you think of ways to represent the information in front of us other than using words? Can anyone predict what they think a reasonable answer might be? We'll compare that to the final solution later. So, do we see a pattern in what the instructor is doing? Do we see a pattern educationally in what they're doing? If you can see a pattern in how the instructor is teaching, please put that in the chat as we go through here. What's the instructor doing? How are they teaching? If you see the pattern already, go ahead and put that in the chat. So bottom of page 2, the students used a visual strategy developing the visual representation on page 3. And so you see the top of page 3, a visual representation that the students developed. And I'll say that again, a visual representation that the students developed to describe the problem. And thank you, Belinda. You're certainly on the track with critical thinking there. So the instructor talks again. What does each part of the diagram represent? I'm on page 3. Andrea says, she gives a couple answers. Part 1 shows this, part 2 shows that. Finally, in part 3, we get this. And then the instructor starts again. Does anyone have ideas about other ways we could represent this information visually? Does it make sense that the number of burgers in a package would be higher than the number of pounds of beef? Why or why not? Now that we have this information, do we have the answer? If not, what do we need to do next? So what's the instructor doing here? How could we classify almost everything that comes out of the instructor's mouth? What are they doing? What does each sentence end with? I'll give you that hint. What does each sentence end with? So let's think about that. Andrea then talks and she says, we need to figure out how many packages are needed to make 50 burgers. Let's make a chart to show ratio of packages to burgers. And so she designed and populated the chart on page 4. And so let's go in the handout to page 4. So we have this chart again that who developed? The students developed. Wow, Nancy, I think we're getting somewhere. There we go. There we go. Yay, Nancy Calloway. I think she's seeing the pattern. The instructor talks again. Based on the chart, how many packages should Sam get out of the freezer? And then why? Were you surprised that he'd need this number of packages? Why or why not? Before you started to figure it out, did you think he would need more or less? And then, so the problem was represented in words first, then with diagrams. What would it look like in symbols? So Nancy and others, thank you, were very much on target for this. Essentially, almost everything the instructor said was a question. They're teaching with questions. And so where did they start? They started with a real life situation that a student brought in from their workplace. Did the instructor then launch into 50-page, here's how you do the problem? No. Instructor let the student solve the problem. They encouraged the students to do it visually. And one thing I've learned in teaching math through the years, if you want to confuse students, start abstractly. 1/4 plus 2/3. What does 1/4 mean? What does 2/3 mean? How do we get those? What are those symbols for? But what I learned for best practice in the evidence-based is CRA, start with concrete if we can. If we're doing volume, grab a cereal box, bring that into class, have students figure out what the volume is by using the dimensions, or if we want to figure out other things, use the actual things that we can put in our head. Algebra, use algebra tiles if we can do that. Those are so important for taking those abstract concepts and putting it into ways that students can understand. One thing that I'll say about teaching our students is this: in many cases, if our students would have been successful with learning things abstractly, they would have stayed in school and they would not be enrolling in our programs to begin with. And if we choose to teach them in ways that were ineffective for them the first time, what magic do we think is going to occur now in our programs that's going to cause them to suddenly get it if we teach in the same way they didn't learn before? So thank you. I got an amen there from Michelle. Appreciate that. So we really have to think about our instructional practice and just doing the same way that we did before, where they didn't understand, but maybe they'll do it now because we're nice people. I don't know that that's going to work. So looking for real life ways to do this. But let's look at the research-based practices we saw inside this lesson. First of all, the instructor acted as a facilitator. And by that, I mean they were the guide on the side versus being the sage on the stage. Who was doing the heavy lifting? The students were doing the heavy lifting. They were the ones that were examining the problem. They were trying to see what the information meant. They were the ones who were creating the charts and the pictorial information there. The instructor, though, wasn't sitting in the back of the room and saying, let me know if you need help. The instructor was actively involved, but as a facilitator, asking good questions of the students to keep the students thinking. And as you saw on these couple of pages, almost every single thing out of the instructor's mouth was using a question and doing really good questions, guided questions in such a way to get the students thinking. And that's different from a lot of the ways that we learn math, a lot of ways that we teach math, where it's here's how you do the problem, here's how you do the problem, here's how you do the problem. And I think sometimes we do too much for our students. And I'm going to say that again. I think sometimes we as math teachers do too much for our students, and we're doing all the work and we're doing all the math, and they're sitting and watching. And the person doing the math is the person who is going to be the successful in learning the math. He or she who does the math is he or she who learns the math. And I will say period to that. So what else can we learn from this lesson? It was taught in a real world context. And that's what our high school equivalency tests, the two remaining survivors, the GD and the HiSET, they are all based on real life situations. I don't always agree when I see practice problems and things that it's really a real life situation that maybe our students will be dealing with. But anyway, they're supposed to be, they're designed to be taught in a real life context. Another important thing, notice that the instructor never said to students as they were answering questions, you're right or you're wrong. And that's hard for us. We certainly want to reward students' thinking and reward students' effort, absolutely. But what I've noticed in the classroom is anytime you say to a student, you're right, what happens to their thought process? They stop thinking. And that's it. The brain's turned off. I got it. Hey, I'm great. Look at me. Or you're wrong. Same kind of thing. A lot of our students, as we well now, have been told you're dumb, you're stupid, you're never going to amount to anything over the years, to the point where many of them believe it. And I think one of our big missions is to help students to overcome that and realize that they are capable and they can be successful with doing math. So I would say be very careful about ever saying you're right or you're wrong. But instead, what the instructor did was kept asking questions. Keep the thinking going. And you keep the thinking going by continuing to ask questions. V Hill, very funny. Oh, I thought you said you, I thought it said you're right. I'm sorry. That would have been funny if someone put you're right in the chat box. But anyway, I guess very, very true would be another way of saying that. But anyway, you're right, you're wrong, a lot of times stops students from thinking. And I want to try to keep students thinking for as long as possible in class. And so I'm going to keep asking questions. Do you agree with your neighbor? How did you get that? There's some good questions that we'll look at on page 5 and ways to keep that going. Well, let's look at it now. What the heck? We can do it. Page 5, good things to say. Classroom questions that keep the conversation going. Emma likes, I like the way you think. I like that too, Emma. I like the way you think. So classroom questions, page 5, the develop math reasoning. We'll go to that one. What does this mean? What are you doing here? Tell me where you're getting these numbers. Why did you decide to? I don't understand. And I've said that so many times because the brain is amazing. And I've done problems before where students came up with 4 or 5 different ways to solve the problems, and all were brilliant. And that's great. That's what we want to, that's what we want to encourage. What are you going to try next? What are you thinking about? Is there another idea you might try? Why did you decide to begin with? Or give a little hint there. Don't tell them the whole thing, but if they're at a stuck point, help the student get unstuck. Do you have any ideas about how you might figure out? You just wrote down x plus 2. Tell me how you got that. What are you doing there with those numbers? Do you agree with Scott's answer? Why or why not? All those things keep the conversation going. The more time, we have such little time with our students in class. The more time that we can get them thinking and keep them thinking, the far better off they're going to be when time comes to take that high stakes high school equivalency test. So going back to lessons from this lesson, the instructor taught math from concrete to abstract. They started with that real world problem. Think about the hamburger. Then they went to a pictorial representation, and that fits along so well with what the research says. Start with concrete, go to representational like a picture, and then go to the abstract concept. Don't start with x plus 2 where students have no idea what that means. So concrete to representational to abstract. And also another great thing that the instructor did was the lesson was primarily visual, and that really helps a lot of our students learn. So all those questions, page 5 will keep this going. So what did I realize about my practice that can help us all as we teach? Page 6 of the handout. We need to teach more in a problem-solving context. I'm not saying, don't teach students how to do decimals and percents. Yeah, they need to know that. But can we teach that in a problem-solving context where we have a real-life problem about fractions and decimals percents? Yes, and I think that's a good way to go. Don't take my word for it. Take George Polya's word for it, who is a brilliant Hungarian mathematician who wrote a wonderful book called How to Solve It back in 1945. And he put together a very simple method. And I like to call it one of our, when I was working at App State, one of our instructors in Asheville came up with calling this the UPS check method. So Kimlitz, this is for you. I took and stole that name with her permission for the UPS check method. So we can teach in a general problem solving format and teach the calculation skills along with it. UPS check, what is it? Understand the problem. What are you asked to do? Can you draw a picture? Can you rewrite the problem in your own words? Create a plan. Direct instruction in math, one thing we should be doing is show how to solve various problems. Show the guess and check method, show the draw a picture method, show the acted out method, make a table, all these things. Show these students these problem solving strategies about how you solve problems, and this can help them to see how they solve problems. That can help others to see. Michelle, I hear you. That's the nature of adult ed with constantly getting new students. I wish I had a solution for you for that, but sadly I don't. So understand, plan, and then S is for solve the problem. And finally, something we almost never do with math in the United States is check. Does our answer make sense? But using this as a framework, no student is going to come back and tell you what you taught me was not on the test, because you're preparing them every single day as we do problem solving to see actual problems the way they're going to see it on the actual high school equivalency test. So what I'm suggesting is, again, I'm not saying don't ever teach calculation. Certainly teach calculation, but do so in a problem solving context. And I've pulled this from a practice test from a New Readers Press publication. Here we've got a variety of various problems that we can use to teach the calculation skills that we want to. But if we can start from a problem solving context, so much the better. And by using UPS check, we've given students a framework in which they can use to solve whatever problem they come up against. No matter what they come up against, they can use UPS check. So use real life examples, just like we saw in the lesson from the Teal MathWorks guide. Someone was asking that earlier. Teal is T-E-A-L. Teal MathWorks guide is where we pulled that lesson out of. But use real life examples. I love this cartoon because this is a great situation where Paige, the young lady here in the cartoon, is very smart and very capable, but she had this problem, 2x plus y equals 60 and x plus 2y equals 75. She had no idea how to solve it, but her brother related it to something she was into, which was shopping. And he gave her a problem that she solved instantly. So teaching from a real life concept, so much the better. And Kathy Teal is T-E-A-L, teaching excellence in adult literacy. Found problems that students bring. Hey, I've got this situation here with my electric bill. Hey, I've got this. So much the better. These found problems are golden, and it's something that a student's going to be relating to. Sally bought 60 watermelons. I don't think so. Workplace situations. We mentioned before, a lot of our students do math at the workplace and have creative solutions for solving things. Tap into that. Thank you, Christopher, for your comment about that cartoon. Love it. Student created problems. I think that's also one thing that we're not doing and that we can do. Have students create problems based on situations that they are going through. And oh yeah, that's where the old math is a silly place where people can buy 60 watermelons and no one wonders why, unless you're catering and really like watermelon. But anyway, have students design problems that are solved in class. They can do it. Especially with our adult students, they've been through life. They have life experience. They can certainly tap into that. One last point that I'll make very quickly because Greg's going to take over. One thing that we are guilty of a lot of times in teaching is only giving our students blocked practice. And by I mean blocked practice, I mean if you're doing problems with fractions, that's all you're giving students 25 of the same problems that we just covered in class. And that's fine initially, give the block practice, but please make as part of our routine mixed practice. The research calls it interleaved practice, and it's kind of like that Rubik's Cube where we want to incorporate problems from everything that we've studied. We don't want to do fractions and then never see them again until we take the practice test or take the real test. We want to make that an ongoing part. And the reset, and that's an example on the screen of blocked practice. These are all percentage problems. There's also on page 8, you can see some examples as well. But please make mixed practice or interleaved practice part of your ongoing practice. This is an example here. If we were studying factoring, this would be a great review at the end of factoring where we're doing common factor, and we're doing 2 parentheses type factoring, and we're doing perfect squares and the whole thing. So we're going through everything, but then also definitely make that mixed practice part of like a practice test that we might find in the back of a book. Make that also part of what we're doing there. So I'm going to stop my share, and so Greg can start his share. But I want to share a quote with you while Greg's bringing up his PowerPoint, and that is, deliberate practice on the toughest parts of the material can lift average brains, which describes my brain, to greater heights. Deliberate practice on the toughest parts of material can lift average brains to greater heights. And so often we don't do that. We try to make things easier for our students, but they need that practice on the harder problems, the kind of problems they're going to see on the high school equivalency. And so I'm going to stop talking because it's Greg's turn. And Greg is going to show you how you can apply some of this information that we've been talking about. And I'm going to try to jump in the chat and say a few things while he's doing that.
Well, thank you, Steve. And hi, everyone. I have to say before I begin that following Steve's act, I always feel like such a monkey. He's just so well spoken and so knowledgeable. Oh, wait a second. Oh, that's better. All right. So what I'm going to do is spend the last 4 or 5 minutes we have giving you a quick look at some New Readers Press math resources that provide problem-solving strategies and teach the problem-solving process. I'll also point to where these resources could provide the mixed or interleaved practice that Steve's been talking about. So first, there's our 4-level Breakthrough to Math series. It's written at reading level 3 to 5, but it takes students from basic skills with whole numbers to fractions, decimals, and percents, to algebra, to geometry. Designed specifically to help students overcome learning obstacles and develop math confidence, the skills are broken down into very basic steps by focusing on one skill at a time. Each book delivers short, manageable chunks of information on each page with plenty of white space to make the instruction less intimidating and more accessible. Each level's teacher's guide begins with a section titled Teaching with Breakthrough the Math. Here, common challenges like math phobia, negative self-image that Steve mentioned, differences in learning style are all addressed. And some instructional strategies are also covered in the beginning, like the think aloud technique Steve and I talked about in our December Lunch and Learn, and the problem-solving process, which includes a full-page problem-solving graphic organizer that instructors may reproduce for classroom use. Here's the graphic organizer found in the teacher guides for levels 3 and 4. That's algebra and geometry. I like how not only are the steps given, but the organizer gets the student thinking by starting a sentence and having the student complete it, just walking them through what's the problem asking? Well, the problem asks, to solve this problem, I will first, next, finally. So I really like that feature myself. For mixed practice or interleaved practice, There are pre and post tests in every student book, 6 books in level 1, 6 in level 2, 5 in level 3, 3 books at level 4. So pre and post tests in each. And there's a mastery checkup. That's a post test for each level. And it's a free resource on our website for every level. So even more practice there. And because I'm not done yet, a workbook for each level has hundreds of practice questions to reinforce what's covered in the student books. Next, from our WorkWise series, Math at Work. Math at Work provides learners with practice applying a problem-solving process to complete workplace math tasks. It's written at reading levels 6 to 8, and it's a part of a 6-book series. Problem solving is defined and explained in the first lesson in the Math at Work, and each lesson that follows begins by briefly explaining a math skill. Math tips in the sidebars explain helpful math skills and tips for working the math problems quickly. Exercises in each lesson then give the students multiple chances to apply the skill and use the problem-solving process in real-life work situations. In this first lesson, exercise 1 walks the students through the steps to arrive at the answer. And then in the second exercise, and for the rest of the book for that matter, students can check off the steps using a problem-solving checklist provided on the page. Here are 2 exercises from lesson 6. The first is a food pantry manager tracking inventory, maybe watermelons, maybe 60 of them, and an electrician's apprentice installing wiring in an office building. And for mixed practice, there are over 70 additional practice questions that are free on our website. One more, and I'll be quick because I know we're running out of time. For at-level high school equivalency test preparation, we offer our 3-book Math Sense series, aptly named Making Sense Out of Math. Reading level 9 up, so this is at-level prep. The second book is actually a focus on problem solving, but all the books have this in common. Each unit in Math Sense is organized around 4 key areas designed to build competence and confidence. There are skill pages, tool pages, test taker pages, and problem solver pages. And more problem solver pages. The problem solver pages present strategies that will help the students find the best way to approach different types of problems. Like this one explaining how to find the area of complex figures by cutting them into smaller pieces and then adding or subtracting. There's plenty of mixed practice in this series from the pretest in each book. And then there are mixed reviews and unit reviews and more mixed review and more unit reviews. And there's a simulated GED test that covers the topics from each respective book. In addition to that GED practice test that's in the back of each book, free simulated task and HiSET tests are available on our website, and they're free downloadable PDFs. Now, I used a red arrow for the task test to point out that it's no longer being given across the country, but it's there for those who see the value in extra practice. So you can access all of these free on our website. Man, look at the time. I know we're out of time. To access the free resources that I mentioned, view the sample pages and correlations to national standards, get a price quote, place an order, or to contact your state sales representative. Please visit our website at www.newreaderspress.com. Just go to newreaderspress.com. On behalf of ProLiteracy's New Readers Press, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And of course, thank you, Steve. We always love to have you on board. You are a wellspring of information. And I'd like to encourage you all for all that you do for the adult learners in your community. Know that we truly appreciate you, and I'm sure they do as well. So until next time, be well and keep on. Steve, any closing thoughts?
And Greg, I'm still amazed at the amount of material you can recover in 5 minutes.
And 2 breaths.
2 breaths, yes. But I just want to say thank you. And I would echo what you're saying. Thank you for the difference you make in the lives of adult learners every day. Appreciate you so much. And it was our joy to be with you today.
So long, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.